Can you believe it is already March? This year is just flying by. And I am just trying to keep up with these Monster Mondays. The best way to start your week. Starting up on this series for this month, we're going to be doing a little bit of a March of the Machines, featuring creatures of steel and circuitry. This is done both for the alliteration, which you all know that I love, and the anticipation of the Starfinder 2nd Edition coming out this year. Now the first of these is the multi-minded triple threat, Blitzwing. If you want more mecha monsters and menaces, give me a like and subscribe to the channel. I'll keep them coming for as long as I can. This week, I've made another mechamorph, and one based off of an actual official Transformer this time, although featuring art borrowed from Victor Red, who is linked in the description below. Blitzwing is a triple changer who, for years, had that as really his only defining feature. However, Transformers Animated featured a take on Blitzwing that had 3 identities to go with his 3 forms, which helped to create a very distinct character. I've largely based my design off of that concept of the character, exploring these multiple personalities and alternating use of ice and fire attacks. These aspects are actually where I reached the level for Blitzwing. 3 identities, 3 modes, 3 squared gets you 9. And if that wasn't perfect enough, old Blitzy here is posted on March 3rd. Again, 3-3. Like the last transforming robo I built, Blitzwing uses the mechamorph, robot, and tech traits, and settles on a huge size, as his alt modes are typically a tank and a jet, a pair of fairly hefty vehicles. While many of the baseline numbers will remain true throughout this build, there will be instances where they deviate depending on which identity is in the lead. We'll talk through those as they come up, though his ability scores will remain consistent throughout his primary identity. He uses a high dexterity, influenced by his favoring of ranged weapons, although classic Blitzwing would fight with a sword as well. I tried to include that with a strength in between moderate and high, letting him pack quite the punch. Both his constitution and wisdom are moderate. He's tough enough to survive the process that made him a triple changer, and an alert enough warrior to warrant these. He settles on a low intelligence and charisma, with them not having any particular import to his design. He has a moderate perception, but I did not innately include dark vision among mechamorphs and couldn't reason giving him any other exceptional senses, so we'll just be leaving that there. As an ostensibly intelligent character, Blitzwing has a few more skills than most of the monsters I make, featuring a moderate acrobatics, athletics, intimidation, and piloting. However, depending which personality is dominant, Blitz will have either a high acrobatics and piloting for Coldheart, or a high athletics and intimidation for Hothead. His deception and stealth skills are both low, regardless of which identity is in charge, as these are mainly to help him hide out in his alternate forms. No matter which head is in the lead, Blitzwing's defenses are probably the most straightforward aspect of him. He starts with a high armor class, as well as a moderate pool of hit points. Admittedly, if his random identity seizes control, he becomes confused, which leaves him off guard with an armor class between moderate and low, but I still use only a moderate pool of hit points because Blitzwing has moderate resistance to cold and fire damage, as well as low resistance to all physical damage, based on his up-armored alt modes. An almost terrible will save is based on the breaking of Blitzwing's mind, but he does have some defenses there, which we'll see when we get to his abilities. Based on his dexterity, he uses a high reflex save, which just leaves his fortitude, and like his constitution, that uses a moderate value. It's a pretty standard array outside of that slightly lower will save than normal. That leaves us with Blitzwing's offensive capabilities, which include a strike and 2 area fire effects. As a capable warrior, Blitzwing wields his tempered blade with a high attack bonus and a high damage value, using reach traits based on his size and the versatile piercing trait seen on a number of simple swords. Straight from the Starfinder playtest, Blitzwing also wields a flamethrower and a zero cannon, depending on which identity is in charge. While these have some different traits befitting the weapons, they both use a between high and extreme DC, as well as high damage. There are a few differences depending on Blitzwing's primary identity. If the wrath-filled Hothead is in the lead, his damage for any of these weapons increases to an average of extreme. If the analytical and tactically minded Coldheart instead has his head on straight, his attack bonus and the DCs for his area fires increase to extreme instead. However, I've been talking cold hard this, hot head that, without really getting into what that all means. With a look at his abilities, that will all become, hopefully, much more clear. Core to the kit of our constructed con, Blitzwing has multiple identities. This is a chunky ability, but it outlines the three distinct personalities that make up his psyche: Cold Heart, Hothead, and Random. Inspired by the identities from Transformers Animated, only one identity can be the primary at any given time, which has its own limitations. As discussed, Coldheart is more strategic but is compelled to use cold-based weapons and abilities, and is limited to the high-flying alt mode of a light fighter jet. On the other hand, Hothead is a bit more brutish and favors fire effects, as well as the ground-bound but burly assault tank alt mode. Finally, there is the Random personality, a true representation of his fractured mind. Random isn't limited by weapon types or actions, and gains the bonuses that either form normally receives, but is left confused for as long as he remains in charge, lashing out in a fit of madness. If the players can end this confusion, such as dealing damage and having him succeed on the flat check, they can force Blitzwing to revert to a more standard personality. Speaking of reverting and converting between identities, battle causes Blitzwing to switch around somewhat erratically, as seen with his identity shift feature. This forces a flat check that causes him to potentially change identity. Breakdown from this effect, there's a 50% chance that he maintains his current identity, a 35% chance he'll swap to Coldheart or Hothead, and a 15% chance that Random will seize control. Blitzwing can also trigger a shift in identities with shunt issues. This reaction triggers against mental effects that he fails against, and it lets him force a swap, leaving one of his other identities with the worst of the effects to get a better degree of success on a save. It's a simple but fun little reaction, and I love making these. Finally, Blitzwing may simply force shift, changing the primary identity to Coldheart or Hothead with a single action, as long as he's able to concentrate enough to do so. To simplify matters a little bit and just better capture this character, Blitzwing wields a specialized weapon, the Thermal Cannon. Just like how he switches identities, this Thermal Cannon can switch between a flamethrower or a zero cannon, and is set up to make that all a little bit easier. Either way, this establishes that he can wield it alongside his sword, and it does increase the size of the flamethrower's magazine so that it simply matches with the magazine of the zero cannon. Either identity can switch the mode of the thermal cannon with an action, but really the only one that actually benefits from that is the random identity, who will want to swap it around on the fly and can do so as a free action once per round, for the sake of functionality. An early ability in the design of Blitzwing was Crank the Thermostat, a single action meant to enhance his next area fire. Between this action and the ones needed for the area fire, this will take up his entire turn, so he needs to be in a place where he can really make use of it. Fortunately, this does end up increasing the range of his areas, bumps the damage up to extreme, but then consumes twice as much ammunition. This means that he'll only be able to use this ability twice before he has to start worrying about reloading. Now I will say again, that was my initial take on Blitzwing, but I was walking the route after building him and I realized that I needed something to spice him up a bit. To do so, I created unique actions for each primary identity. The first of these is Hothead's Fire and Fury. This is simply an action compressor, letting Blitz combine a Sword Strike with a Flamethrower area fire, which had one hell of an effect during the Monster Mash, getting a crit with a blade and triggering a crit failure with a Flamethrower all at once. Alternatively, Coldheart gains access to Deep Breeze. He focuses fire, for a given value of fire, on a single foe, dealing the effects of the zero cannon, but more than that. A failure leaves the affected enemy slowed 1, but a critical failure freezes the frigid foe solid with its effects based on the Glacial Prison Kineticist Impulse. It's a good way for Blitzwing to lay down some lockdown on a particularly perturbing foe. Finally, we have Random's action. And what would a build for a bot named Blitzwing be without a little Blitzkrieg bot? This is a 3-action ability and it bypasses the 2-action area fire effects as well as their unwieldy trait, letting Blitzwing unleash a blast from the zero cannon and then a blast from his flamethrower, or vice versa. While it will be a narrow strip, if Blitzwing catches enemy in both areas of the effects, they take 1 degree of success worse on their second save, which is actually based on a passive ability I originally considered for Blitzwing, where he could cause extreme stress when dealing alternating cold and fire damage to a single target. I couldn't quite figure out how to fully bring that concept online, so I'm glad I could at least get it working in this regard. Now there's one ability that I haven't talked about yet, and that is Convert. This is core to mechamorphs, and transformers as well, and that is almost especially the case for Blitzwing. As I've alluded to already, we have not one but two alt modes for him, which means double the vehicles to present. Now given Blitzwing's name, as well as the accent and design from Transformers Animated, I wanted to use vehicles that were a little inspired by German war machines. First up is Hothead's preferred Assault Tank alt mode, a dual-barreled light tank meant for anti-infantry operations, akin to the Panzer I. This alt mode is a bit burlier with a decent hardness and substantial hit points for a vehicle of its level, and its main attack is bringing its dual autocannons to bear. The damage is based on siege engines for its level, while I determined the DCs based on other vehicles of the same level. As a point of interest, I did include something special for Blitzwing when he's in his assault tank mode, converting some of that damage to fire damage and potentially igniting enemies when they critically fail their saving throws. This just more leans into the fire aspect of Hothead. And now while that is Hothead's favorite alt mode, Coldheart prefers to have a view from above with his light fighter jet alt mode. This takes some inspiration from the Dornier Alpha Jet, a French/German light attack jet that comes equipped with an autocannon and a suite of missiles. Obviously much faster than the tank and able to fly, the jet lacks the passenger capacity and isn't as heavily armored. Like the tank, the autocannon functions as a siege engine sort of effect with a single target, while its missiles are its area effect. However, being Coldheart, he naturally swaps out the fire damage of the missiles for cold damage, and will leave enemies partially frozen and slowed when they critically fail their saves against them. With that all said, I think we've covered the design of this mechanized menace. It takes a team to tangle with its towering techno-terror and triplicate, traipsing through truly transformational temperamental trauma to take out their target. One of the big appeals of working on Blitzwing was figuring out how to represent his dissociative identities, and I think I'm pretty happy with them. I'd love to use this idea again, likely without the random persona, but I'll definitely have to workshop it, and figure out how to apply this to a creature or NPC. Now when it comes to using Blitzwing in a campaign, he's pretty adaptable. He's the first Decepticon I've ever built, so until I have more of his usual comrades in play, he will likely be flying solo, but you could have him find work as a mercenary, or tread familiar ground at trying to be the big boss himself. Let me know what you think of this mecha monster and what other sorts of creatures you'd like to see in a comment. If you want to see the other monsters I've made, check out the Monster Monday blog, which is linked in the description below along with the Twitter and Discord. There's no D&D version this time around due to the lack of vehicles in that system, but if you want to see the other monsters I made, check out the Monster Monday blog, which is linked in the description below along with the Twitter and Discord. Thanks for watching, and have a monstrous Monday.
You promised us a partnership in leading the Decepticons! Tell you what, guys, why don't you go build a bridge and jump off it?